In Harthwick's coldest winter in 20 years, a German Shepherd mother carried her freezing puppy from door to door, but no one would let them in. Then 74-year-old former Navy SEAL Hollis Merrick found them collapsing beside the road and brought them into his quiet home. But the tag on Kestrel's collar led back to North Glass Farm, whose wealthy owner soon arrived, demanding both dogs back. The moment Kestrel heard his voice, she retreated and wrapped herself around Mica as if protecting him from more than just the cold. Days later, Mica suddenly began trembling and losing his balance, raising a disturbing question. Had something at North Glass already harmed them? A strange drainage ditch and hidden inconsistencies soon pointed toward a much larger truth, and Hollis had to decide how far he was willing to go to protect them. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Winter did not arrive in Harthwick, Vermont, with drama. There was no single storm people could point to later and say, that was when it began. The cold simply settled lower each night until the town seemed to shrink beneath it. By daylight, Harthwick could look almost beautiful enough to forgive the season. Snow lay clean across the roofs, maple branches glittered beneath ice, and sunlight bounced off the valley so fiercely that drivers lowered their visors even beneath a pale January sky. After dark, beauty stopped pretending to be kindness. Temperatures fell into territory the town had not seen in 20 years. Old trees cracked in the forest with sounds like distant rifle shots. Pipes froze inside walls. Secondary roads vanished beneath wind-blown snow before plow crews could finish clearing the first pass. North of town, beyond a low ridge of spruce and abandoned pasture, North Glass Farm kept its greenhouse roofs glowing through much of the night. From a distance, the long glass buildings looked almost warm. They were not. Behind the modern growing houses stood older structures the business rarely showed in photographs. Equipment sheds, utility buildings, storage barns, and a fenced kennel near an unused loading lane. That was where Kestrel lived. She was 6 years old, a large female German Shepherd with a charcoal black back and deep copper-red coloring across her chest, legs, and face. A small crescent-shaped notch marked the outside edge of her right ear. Under better circumstances, she carried herself with the deliberate confidence of a dog accustomed to watching gates, listening to engines, and deciding which sounds mattered. That winter had thinned her. 5 weeks earlier she had given birth. Only one puppy remained strong enough to follow her into the bitter part of January. Mica was still more softness than dog, with oversized paws, a black muzzle, and a pale cream mark at the center of his chest. His ears had not yet decided what they intended to become. That night, one of North Glass Farm's auxiliary heating lines failed. The kennel lost warmth first. By midnight, the metal water bowl had begun to skin over with ice. By 2 in the morning, the bedding beneath Kestrel was cold, despite the heat of her body. By 3, Mica stopped crawling toward her belly when she shifted. Inside the main administrative building, miles of pipe alarms and greenhouse temperature readings competed for attention. Silas Broom had been the farm's foreman for nearly 18 years. At 61, he carried those years in a slight bend through his shoulders and in hands permanently stained by machinery, soil, and work that never ended exactly where the schedule said it should. His pickup made it less than halfway down the service road toward the kennel. Ice had hardened beneath the new snow. The rear tires spun once, caught, then slid sideways toward the ditch. Silas stopped. He sat gripping the wheel while the heater blew lukewarm air against the windshield. The kennel was still more than half a mile away. He called Blaine Huxley. No answer. He called again. Nothing. Silas looked at the glowing inspection form on the tablet mounted near the dashboard. The correct answer was simple. Unable to reach kennel. Road inaccessible. He knew that. He also knew Blaine had spent the previous 12 hours shouting over frozen valves, damaged greenhouse panels, delayed trucks, and a delivery contract already hanging by a thread. Silas told himself the dogs had shelter. He told himself Kestrel was tough. He told himself he would return at first light. Then he tapped the box. Checked. No immediate problem. The words remained on the screen after he submitted them. Silas stared at them longer than necessary. Some lies arrived loudly enough to frighten the person telling them. Others looked like paperwork. He backed the truck away from the ice. By morning, Harthwick was nearly sealed off, and in the kennel, Mica was no longer shivering. That frightened Kestrel more than shivering would have. She nosed him. No response. She licked the side of his face. A faint movement. Kestrel curled tighter around him, pressing her chest against his small body, but the cold was already coming through the floor, through the walls, through every piece of the building humans had once assumed would be enough. There was almost no food left. The water was solid. Kestrel stood. For several minutes she paced the fence. Then she began worrying at a section of wire near the bottom of the service gate. The mesh had bent away from its fastening months earlier. Snow had packed around it, hiding the weakness. Kestrel bit, pulled, stopped to return to Mica, bit again. By the time she opened a gap large enough to force her shoulders through, her gums were bleeding. She went back for the puppy. Mica weighed almost nothing in her mouth. That was wrong. Puppies were supposed to squirm, complain, make carrying them inconvenient. Mica hung quietly from the loose skin at his neck. Kestrel stepped into the snow. She did not know where help lived. She only knew where death had begun. So she followed the smells that did not belong to North Glass. Wood smoke, road salt, cooking fat, people. The first house had yellow light and a kitchen window. Kestrel climbed the porch steps, placed Mica on the boards, and scratched once at the door. A man appeared behind the glass. He saw the dog, then the puppy. His hand moved toward the lock, stopped. Kestrel waited. The man looked toward the road, then back at the collar around Kestrel's neck. He did not open the door. At another house, a woman opened hers only a few inches. Cold air rushed between them. Oh, Lord! Her eyes fell to Mica, then to the metal tag. North Glass Farm. Something changed in her face. Not cruelty, calculation. Fear had many respectable disguises. I can't get involved with Huxley. The door closed. At a third property, someone pushed a bowl of kibble outside and retreated behind the storm door. Kestrel lowered her head to it. Her stomach tightened at the smell. She had not eaten enough in days. Mica made a weak sound behind her. Kestrel turned away from the food. She lifted him again and kept walking. That was the part no one in those houses would remember correctly later. They would remember the weather. They would remember that the roads were dangerous. They would remember that they had families, frozen pipes, responsibilities, reasons. None of them thought of themselves as people who abandoned a dying animal. They simply believed someone farther down the road would become the person who helped. By late morning, Kestrel's footprints had become uneven. She stopped more often. Mica no longer made sounds. The wind had begun filling the tracks behind them almost as quickly as they appeared. 30 miles west of Harthwick, Hollis Merrick was already regretting the walnut clock case strapped inside his trailer. Not buying it, he never regretted buying anything well-made. He regretted believing the weather forecast from 6 hours earlier. At 74, Hollis was still a large man, 6'1", broad through the chest, heavy in the shoulders, built more like an old oak than a retired athlete. Age had deepened his long face, sharpened the cheekbones, and etched permanent lines around green-gray eyes that looked stern until something earned their warmth. His thick silver-gray hair, still streaked faintly with ash-brown, was pushed back from his forehead in loose waves. A neatly trimmed full beard of the same color covered his jaw. He wore an old olive field jacket with a faded U.S. veteran patch over a charcoal and forest flannel shirt, dark canvas work pants, and brown leather boots powdered white with snow. His left wrist carried an old Hamilton mechanical watch with a scratched steel case. Hollis checked it as the radio interrupted a weather report. Road closures were moving east. He had left early that morning to collect a walnut long case clock from an estate outside Montpelier, expecting to be home before the worst of the system reached Harthwick. The trailer behind his restored olive Ford F-100 bore the hand-painted words, "Merrick Old Things, Bought, Fixed, or Remembered." His late wife Adeline had laughed the first time she saw the slogan. "Sounds like you're adopting furniture," she had said. Maybe he was. Old Things asked very little. A dry room, careful hands, time. They did not ask why a man had allowed his life to become so quiet. Hollis turned onto the last county road toward Harthwick. Snow moved over the asphalt in pale ribbons. Then something dark appeared beside the road. He eased off the accelerator. At first he thought it was a deer carcass dragged from the trees. Then it moved. A German shepherd. The dog was carrying something. Hollis leaned toward the windshield. The small shape in her mouth gave one weak twitch. He hit the brakes. The Ford stopped at an angle along the shoulder. Kestrel saw him immediately. She placed Mica in the snow and moved in front of him. Her legs trembled. Her head did not. Hollis opened the truck door. Kestrel lowered her body. He stopped. Old training lived in strange places. In the military, hesitation could kill, but so could moving faster than the situation allowed. Hollis stepped down, closed the door gently, and crouched several yards away. He removed one glove. The cold bit his hand instantly. He lowered his palm onto the snow where she could see it. "That's far enough," he murmured, though he was speaking mostly to himself. Kestrel watched him. Her copper-brown eyes moved to his hand, then his face, then Mica. The puppy lay too still. Hollis felt urgency begin pressing behind his ribs. He ignored it. "Your call," he said quietly. For several seconds nothing changed. Then Kestrel turned. She picked Mica up. Hollis expected her to retreat. Instead, she came forward. One step. Another. Snow clung to the fur beneath her chest. She stopped just beyond his reach and lowered Mica onto the white ground between them. Hollis looked at the puppy, then at the mother. Something had been decided. He moved. Mica was frighteningly cold. Not the surface cold of snow, a deeper cold. His response to touch was weak, his breathing shallow enough that Hollis had to bend close to see the movement of his ribs. Damn! He stripped off his outer scarf, wrapped the puppy, then returned to the trailer for an old wool blanket used to protect furniture. He did not put Mica directly against the truck heater. He did not rub him hard. Instead, he called Lenora Quaid. The veterinarian answered on the fourth ring. "Hollis? I've got a puppy. 5 weeks, maybe 6. Severe cold exposure. Barely responsive." Her voice changed immediately. "Don't heat him fast." "I know." "No, you know people. Listen to me for the puppy." Even then, Hollis almost smiled. That was Lenora. She gave him instructions while county plows worked toward his side of Harthwick. Gradual warmth, airway, monitor breathing, no food yet. Keep the mother close if she stays calm. Hollis placed Mica inside the cab. Before he could decide what to do about Kestrel, she climbed awkwardly onto the floorboard behind him. No command, no coaxing. She simply followed her puppy. During the drive home, Hollis kept one hand near the bundled shape beside him. Kestrel sat behind the passenger seat, exhausted but upright. Every few seconds she looked down at Mica, then at Hollis. At the house, he carried the puppy inside first. Kestrel came behind him. The old place filled suddenly with sounds it had not known in years. Nails against floorboards, cabinet doors opening, a kettle, Hollis's voice talking to another living thing without expecting an answer. As he settled Mica near controlled warmth, Kestrel remained close enough to watch. Only then did Hollis notice the raw place beneath her collar. He reached toward the buckle. Kestrel stiffened. Hollis stopped, waited. Eventually, she allowed him to turn the collar just enough to see the metal tag. His thumb wiped away moisture. The stamped letters became clear. North Glass Farm. Hollis sat back slowly. He knew the farm. Everyone in Harthwick did. And he knew the name attached to it. Blaine Huxley. For a moment, Hollis looked from the tag to the exhausted mother lying beside her nearly frozen puppy. Then he thought about the stretch of road they had just traveled. The houses, the smoke curling from chimneys, the people who must have seen her before he did. The silence of those closed doors suddenly made more sense. That did not make them easier to forgive. Outside, snow began covering the Ford's tire tracks. Inside, Hollis pulled the blanket a little higher around Mica. Kestrel watched his hands. This time she did not move away. The next hours did not become a miracle. That was the first thing Hollis understood. Mica did not warm beside the stove and suddenly lift his head as if winter had merely inconvenienced him. His body had gone too far into the cold for anything so merciful. Recovery arrived in fractions. A deeper breath, A twitch beneath the blanket, a little more resistance when Hollis touched a paw. Small signs, each one carrying more weight than it deserved. By late afternoon, the county plow finally carved a narrow path up the road to Hollis's house. Dr. Lenora Quaid arrived behind it in a gray Subaru crusted with salt and frozen slush. She stepped through the door carrying 2 medical bags and the expression of a woman who had no patience for panic because she had spent decades working around things that could not afford it. Lenora was 63, slender and straight-backed, with ash-gray hair loosely pinned at the nape of her neck. A pair of narrow rectangular glasses sat low on her nose when she read, though she pushed them onto her head the moment she saw Mica. "Tell me exactly what you did." Hollis did. No embellishment. No attempt to make himself useful by sounding more useful than he had been. Lenora listened while checking Mica's temperature, gums, breathing, hydration, and reflexes. When she finished, she exhaled through her nose. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, underfed. Hollis watched her face. "Is he going to make it?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't say no." "I didn't say yes either." That answer would have irritated many people. Hollis trusted it immediately. Lenora worked in the middle of his living room while the stove pushed heat steadily through the old house. Mica stayed on a thick folded blanket near the hearth but not directly against it. Lenora set warmed fluids, checked his temperature again, and adjusted the insulating layers around him. Kestrel remained close. Too close at first. Every time Lenora touched Mica, the mother's shoulders tightened, her ears moved forward, her breathing shortened, but she did not growl. Lenora glanced at her once. "Good dog." Hollis looked over. "She doesn't look like she agrees." "No, but she's choosing not to bite me." High praise. For a first visit? Absolutely. Kestrel's copper-brown eyes moved between them. When Hollis reached down to shift Mica slightly, Kestrel rose. He stopped. He did not tell her she was being foolish, did not reach farther. He held his hand where she could see it. "Easy." Kestrel stared at him for several seconds. Then slowly she stepped backward. Only one pace. It was enough. Hollis moved the puppy. Later, he would remember that moment more clearly than the medical instructions. Trust did not arrive as surrender. It arrived measured in inches. Mica survived the first night. Hollis barely slept. By dawn, his coffee tasted burnt because he reheated the same cup 3 times and forgot it twice. Lenora returned before noon. Mica's temperature had improved. His hydration was better. Not safe. Better. There was a difference, and Lenora guarded that difference fiercely. "He needs quiet, warmth, small feedings once I clear them. No excitement." Hollis looked toward Kestrel. "She's running a very calm operation." Lenora followed his gaze. Kestrel sat beside the blanket like a guard assigned to a position no one else had requested. "You may have to convince her to rest." "I've never successfully convinced a German Shepherd of anything." Lenora gathered one of her instruments. "Then you're finally doing work appropriate to your skill level." Hollis almost smiled. Almost. By the second night, Mica began to respond more strongly. Not much, but enough that when Hollis lifted one corner of the blanket, the puppy made a thin, irritated sound. Hollis froze, then looked toward Kestrel. Her ears lifted. The sound came again, small, raspy, annoyed. Hollis sat back. "Well?" Kestrel shifted closer. Mica's nose appeared from beneath the blanket. For a few seconds, he looked less like a dying animal and more like a puppy offended by poor service. That mattered. The house changed around him. Before Kestrel and Mica arrived, Hollis's days had followed a pattern polished by repetition. Wake at 5. Coffee. Firewood. Check the workshop. Inspect whatever clock, radio, cabinet, or chair sat waiting on the bench. Leave if there was a pickup scheduled. Return. Eat, read, sleep. He had never written the routine down. He did not need to. It lived in his bones. Now the clock belonged to Mica. 3 in the morning meant checking temperature. 4 meant changing a damp towel. 5 meant taking Kestrel outside. 6 meant preparing the small amount of food Lenora had approved. Hollis found himself washing bowls he had not owned a week earlier. moving furniture because Kestrel disliked having her back exposed, placing an old folded rug beside the stove because she refused the soft dog bed Wesley later brought. He did all of it while pretending none of it was becoming normal. On the third morning, Mica was strong enough to take formula from a bottle, not elegantly. The first attempt ended with more liquid on Hollis's beard than in the puppy. The second went better. The third ended when Mica sneezed a fine spray across the front of Hollis's flannel shirt. Hollis stared at him. Mica blinked. Hollis looked down at the milk, then back at the puppy. "You know," he said, 30 years ago I believed SEAL training had prepared me for most forms of humiliation." Mica sneezed again. This time Hollis laughed. It came out before he could stop it. Not loudly, not for long, but the sound traveled strangely through the house. Hollis noticed that first. The room seemed too large for it. He had lived there alone long enough that laughter had become something the walls remembered better than he did. Kestrel lifted her head. For 1 second she looked almost suspicious of the noise. Then she lowered it again. Later that afternoon, a snowplow engine rattled into the drive. Wesley Finch arrived wearing his old Navy chore coat over a burgundy sweater, carrying a bag of dog food in one hand and coffee in the other. At 68, Wesley was shorter and rounder than Hollis, with pale blue eyes, a silver mustache, and very little hair left on the crown of his head. A watchmaker's magnifying loupe hung from a cord around his neck because he routinely forgot to remove it after work. He stepped inside, looked at the blankets, feeding supplies, veterinary notes, and 2 German shepherds. Then he looked at Hollis. "You left town to collect a clock case." "Yes." "You came back with livestock." "They're dogs." "That is not the important part of the sentence." Hollis took the coffee from him. Wesley crouched carefully, keeping his distance from Kestrel. She watched him. He did not offer a hand. Smart. "Which one owns the house now?" Hollis glanced toward Kestrel. "Undecided." Wesley nodded toward Mica. "And that one?" "Management." The visit lasted less than an hour. Wesley did not force conversation about Adeline. Did not tell Hollis the house seemed better this way. That was one of the reasons they had remained friends for so long. He knew when not to say the thing both men had already noticed. After Wesley left, Hollis found the spare coffee on the counter, along with fresh batteries, a heating pad approved by Lenora, and a bag of food Kestrel would actually eat. No note. None was needed. Kestrel remained cautious. She slept in brief stretches. A spoon striking the sink could make her shoulders tense. The metal latch on the wood box made her head snap around. When Hollis moved too quickly behind her, she shifted automatically so Mica remained on the opposite side. He learned. He announced himself before stepping past. He approached from where she could see him. He stopped treating her vigilance as a problem to correct. Instead, he built routines around it. Water appeared in the same place. Food at roughly the same time. Doors opened slowly. Nothing was taken from her without warning. There was no dramatic breakthrough, only repetition. Safety, Hollis began to understand, might be nothing more than a pattern that did not betray you. 3 nights later, the electricity failed. The house went black so quickly the silence felt physical. The stove still held heat, but the small fan near Mica's bedding stopped. Hollis reached immediately for the flashlight he kept on the side table. Before he switched it on, he heard Kestrel move. Her nails crossed the floor. He expected her to go straight to Mica. Instead, she stopped beside Hollis, close enough that her shoulder brushed his knee. The flashlight clicked on. Kestrel looked up at him, then toward the puppy. Hollis understood. All right. They crossed the room together. Mica was fine, still warm, still asleep. Kestrel checked him, then remained beside Hollis while he adjusted the blankets. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but something had shifted. Until then, Kestrel had behaved as if every danger in the world belonged to her alone. Now, in the dark, she had come to find him first. Not for rescue, for partnership. Hollis rested one hand on the floor beside her. He did not touch. Kestrel leaned slightly toward it anyway. Across town, Silas Broom sat alone at his kitchen table. The storm had reduced his evening to the hum of the refrigerator and the blue light of the tablet propped against a coffee mug. The inspection report remained open. Checked. No immediate problem. He had heard what happened. Everyone connected to North Glass had: a dog found miles from the farm, a nearly frozen puppy, Hollis Merrick involved. Silas had replayed the night several times: the icy road, the unanswered call, the pressure, the form. He kept trying to locate the exact moment when the situation stopped being bad luck and became partly his fault. The trouble was, he knew. It had been the moment his thumb touched the screen. Silas closed the tablet, opened it again. He did not delete the report. Could not. It had already been submitted. More importantly, deleting it would not change what had happened. For the first time, Silas understood something Hollis had learned many years before. A mistake did not become smaller just because no one had yet asked you about it. Outside, the storm continued for 2 more days. Then the sky cleared. Harthwick emerged beneath a hard blue morning, almost offensively beautiful. Snow glittered from rooftops. People shoveled steps. Engines started again. The post office reopened. A delivery truck moved slowly along Main Street. The town began putting itself back into ordinary order. At Hollis's house, Mica slept beneath a blanket with his small chest rising in a steady rhythm. Kestrel lay near the window. Hollis was rinsing a feeding bottle when her head lifted. Not sharply. Not yet. She stared through the glass. Far below the house, a dark vehicle had turned onto the road. A black SUV began climbing the hill. Kestrel rose. The change in her was immediate. Her body went still. Her ears lowered slightly. And for the first time in several days, the house that had begun to breathe seemed to hold that breath. The black SUV stopped at the top of Hollis Merrick's drive without spraying snow or revving its engine. That was the first thing Hollis noticed. Whoever was inside had taken the hill slowly, deliberately. Kestrel stood beside the living room window, every muscle pulled tight beneath her dark coat. Her reaction was different from the night the electricity failed. Then, she had gone looking for Hollis. Now she seemed to disappear inward. Her ears lowered, her head came down. She stepped away from the glass and crossed the room directly to Mica's bedding. The puppy was awake, chewing weakly at the edge of a folded towel with the determination of someone who had recently discovered teeth and considered them a major technological breakthrough. Kestrel lowered herself around him. Not on top of him. Around him. A wall with a heartbeat. Hollis set the feeding bottle on the counter. Outside, the driver's door opened. Blaine Huxley stepped into the cold. At 57, Blaine looked less like a farmer than the owner of one. He was broad through the torso, well-fed without being soft, his dark hair cut short and threaded with silver at the temples. A deep chestnut waxed canvas coat fit him cleanly over a navy wool sweater. His gloves were black leather, too good for fence repair and too practical to be decorative. A silver signet ring showed briefly when he removed one glove. North Glass was engraved into its face. Hollis opened the front door but did not step aside. "Mr. Merrick." Blaine's voice was pleasant. Not warm. Pleasant was something a man could manufacture. "Huxley." Blaine glanced past him. "I heard you found Kestrel." "And the pup." "Yes." The word came a fraction too late. Blaine smiled as if correcting an oversight. "And the puppy." Snow moved lightly across the porch between them. "I wanted to thank you," Blaine said. "That storm caught everybody wrong. We lost heat in one auxiliary section. Roads went down. Staff couldn't reach half the property." Hollis said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence did useful things to explanations. Blaine continued. "Kestrel must have gotten out after the heating line failed. Damaged fencing, probably." "Probably. I've had people repairing it since yesterday." Hollis looked at him. There were many ways to lie. Blaine's was to leave just enough truth inside the sentence that challenging it became tiresome. "I'd like to take them home." Hollis did not move. "The puppy's still under veterinary care." "I understand. I'm prepared to handle that." "Lenora says he shouldn't be moved yet." At the veterinarian's name, something changed behind Blaine's eyes, only briefly. Then it was gone. "I have brought the registration." He reached slowly into the inside of his coat and produced a waterproof document sleeve. Hollis took the papers because refusing to look at something did not make it less real. Kestrel's name, North Glass Farm, veterinary registration records, ownership information. Everything appeared orderly. Blaine nodded toward the house. She belongs to the farm. The sentence was legally plain. Emotionally, it landed differently. Behind Hollis, Mica gave a small squeak. Kestrel shifted. Blaine heard it. His gaze moved over Hollis's shoulder. For the first time, Hollis saw the dog through Blaine's eyes. Not as a mother, not as a frightened animal, as something registered, assigned, owned. Kestrel saw Blaine too. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She pressed herself lower around Mica. Blaine's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. That's strange. What is? She never used to be skittish. Hollis looked at Kestrel, then back at Blaine. Dogs change. So do circumstances. There was the first edge, small enough that either man could pretend it had not appeared. Blaine looked again at Hollis's jacket, at the faded U.S. veteran patch, then at the old Hamilton watch peeking beneath his cuff. You serve? A long time ago. Army? Navy? Blaine waited. Hollis did not fill the silence. Something like irritation crossed his face. What did you do? Some things I was paid to do. Blaine almost laughed. SEAL? Hollis looked at him. That was answer enough. Blaine did not step backward. He did not suddenly become frightened. Instead, he studied Hollis with more care. The long, weathered face, the silver beard, the broad shoulders that age had not quite managed to soften. More importantly, perhaps, the lack of interest in proving anything. Men who wanted others to know they were dangerous were usually simpler to handle. Hollis did not seem interested in being handled at all. Blaine put his glove back on. I don't want this to become unpleasant. Neither do I. My lawyer may contact you. That seems reasonable. Another pause. Blaine had perhaps expected anger, or fear, or the familiar hostility that could be turned into evidence of irrational behavior. Hollis gave him none. I'll be in touch. Fine. Blaine walked back to the SUV. The vehicle descended the hill with the same measured restraint it had arrived with. Only when it disappeared did Hollis shut the door. He turned. Kestrel had not moved. He crossed the room but stopped before entering her space. He's gone. Her eyes stayed on the door. Mica, unaware of legal ownership and human pride, managed to roll sideways into his own water dish. The splash broke the tension. Hollis sighed. Excellent timing. Kestrel looked down at the puppy. For several seconds the room belonged to simpler problems again. The lawyer's letter arrived the following afternoon. Not by mail. Courier. That annoyed Hollis more than it should have. The envelope was heavy cream stock, the kind of paper designed to make ordinary words cost money. The letter was polite. Northglass acknowledged Hollis's assistance. Northglass appreciated the emergency circumstances. Northglass was prepared to reimburse documented veterinary expenses. Northglass requested immediate return of its registered animals once medical transport was approved. A second page offered compensation for food, heating, transportation, and reasonable inconvenience. Hollis read that phrase twice. Reasonable inconvenience. Mica was asleep on his back nearby, cream chest exposed, front paws twitching in a dream. Kestrel lay with her chin on the floor, watching Hollis read. He folded the letter, did not tear it, did not throw it into the stove. Instead, he placed it inside a drawer with the veterinary notes. Lenora called that evening. I reported the situation. To whom? County Animal Welfare. Hollis leaned against the counter. You could have told me first. I'm telling you now. That's not what first means. No, but you would have spent 6 hours deciding whether you wanted me to do it. He had no answer because she was correct. Someone may come by tomorrow. Fine. She's not coming to confirm your opinion. Good. She'll want documents. I have them. Of course you do. The next morning, Deputy Coralie Venn arrived in a county vehicle with salt whitening the lower panels. At 52, Coralie carried herself with the quiet economy of someone who had spent long enough in law enforcement to stop performing authority for strangers. She was tall, with a straight athletic build under a dark winter-duty jacket. Her black hair, streaked silver at the temples, fell in a short bob just along the jaw. A thin scar crossed above her left eyebrow. She held no dramatic expression when Hollis opened the door. She simply looked. At him. At the room. At Kestrel. At Mica. Then she removed a small black notebook from her breast pocket. Hollis Merrick? Yes. Deputy Coralie Venn. I figured. Her eyes lifted. From the uniform? Strong clue. The corner of her mouth moved. Barely. That was the entire joke. Coralie spent nearly an hour asking questions. Where had Hollis found them? When? What condition was Mica in? Had Kestrel shown aggression? Had Hollis entered North Glass property? Had Blaine threatened him? No. Did he demand the dogs? He requested them with paperwork. That matters. I know. Coralie read Blaine's documents, then Lenora's notes, then looked at Mica. The puppy had developed enough confidence to glare at her boot as though it represented an invading army. Coralie crouched at a respectful distance. Mica attempted one tiny bark. It came out as a cough. Coralie looked at Hollis. Terrifying. He's been briefed on escalation. She stood. Her tone became more serious. Paper ownership doesn't disappear because an animal was found in bad condition. I'm aware. But documented medical need matters. So do circumstances of abandonment or neglect if they can be established. Hollis did not like the word if. He respected it anyway. Coralie contacted County Animal Control from his kitchen. The conversation was dull, procedural, names, dates, veterinary findings. Temporary care language. No music would ever swell behind paperwork. But by late afternoon, something important existed that had not existed that morning. Kestrel and Mica could remain with Hollis temporarily while their medical and welfare status was reviewed. Not ownership, not victory. Time. Sometimes time was the most valuable protection the law could offer. Blaine's approach changed after that. Not publicly. Nothing so crude. A man Hollis had known for years called to say he had decided not to sell an old Philco radio after all. Family changed their minds, he said. 2 days later, Hollis heard from Wesley that someone at the diner had been wondering aloud whether a 74-year-old man living alone should be taking in animals that belong to other people. Another person remarked that some veterans don't adjust right after service. Hollis had been out of uniform longer than the speaker had been married. That detail apparently did not matter. The rumors annoyed him less than the method. No accusation was large enough to confront, nothing definite enough to challenge. A fog could not be punched. For several days, Hollis considered the simplest solution. There were approved temporary care facilities. Lenora knew people. The dogs could go somewhere neutral. The pressure would move away from his house. He told himself neutrality might even be safer. That evening, he brought an old wooden crate from the workshop. He placed some of Mica's supplies inside, a spare blanket, bottles, medication notes. Kestrel watched from beside the stove. Hollis avoided looking at her. "This isn't about you." The sentence sounded foolish the moment he said it. Mica slept through the entire moral crisis. Hollis folded another towel and put it into the crate. Then Kestrel stood. She did not go to Mica. She walked toward the chair where Hollis had dropped his field jacket. One of his old leather gloves had fallen underneath it. Kestrel lowered her nose, picked up the glove, carried it back across the room. Hollis watched. She set it beside Mica's blanket, then lay down. Her muzzle rested partly across the worn leather. Hollis stared at the glove. He knew better than to make mythology out of animal behavior. The glove smelled like him. That might have been all. But trust itself was built partly from scent, repetition, memory. Maybe Kestrel had simply learned that where Hollis's smell remained, nothing bad had followed. That was enough. Hollis looked at the crate. For weeks he had been rearranging his house around the dogs. Now he realized he was about to rearrange the dogs around other people's discomfort. That was different. He took the blanket back out. Then the bottles. Then the notes. The crate returned to the workshop. Kestrel watched him do it. She did not wag, did not rise. Nothing dramatic happened. Hollis preferred it that way. The next morning he called Coralie. She answered on the third ring. "Venn. Merrick. I know. Your name appeared on the screen. Technology ruins introductions. What do you need?" Hollis looked across the kitchen. Mica was wrestling unsuccessfully with the corner of a rug. Kestrel lay nearby, not guarding the door, watching the puppy. "We do this properly." Coralie was quiet for a moment. "That was already the plan. I mean all of it, every document, every call. Whatever review they require. You understand that doing it properly doesn't guarantee you get the outcome you want. Hollis looked at Kestrel. I'm not sure what outcome I want yet. That answer surprised him, but it was true. He did not need to own her. He did not need Blaine to lose. He did not need Harthwick to decide he was right. He only needed the next decision to be one no one could later hide behind. No shortcuts, Hollis said. Coralie's voice softened by almost nothing. Those usually cost more anyway. After the call, Hollis stood by the window. Winter light stretched across the floorboards. Kestrel raised her head. For the first time since arriving, the door behind her was not the closest thing she watched. Mica was. And when Hollis crossed the room, she made space for him beside them. Not much, just enough. It was becoming a habit. And some habits, Hollis was beginning to learn, were worth keeping. By the second week, Mica had discovered appetite. He approached every meal as though food might be outlawed before sunset. The weakness that had once made lifting his head an effort was giving way to an awkward, badly coordinated enthusiasm. He could stand longer now. He could cross half the living room before one oversized paw betrayed him. He had also decided Hollis Merrick's bootlaces were either prey or a personal insult. Hollis had not determined which. Mica crouched beside one boot one morning, rear end raised, cream-colored chest nearly touching the floor. He lunged, missed, rolled onto his shoulder, got up immediately and tried again. Hollis looked down over the rim of his coffee. The smallest security threat in Vermont. Mica bit the lace. Persistent, too. Kestrel lay near the stove and watched the performance with the exhausted patience of a mother who had stopped expecting dignity from her offspring. The house had become noisy in small ways. Bowls slid across floors. Mica sneezed. Kestrel sighed. The kettle clicked. Hollis spoke aloud more often than he noticed. There were still moments when the silence returned suddenly and reminded him of how the place had sounded before them, but it no longer seemed to own the rooms. That morning, Mica let go of the bootlace and started toward Kestrel. 3 steps. 4. Then he stopped. Hollis noticed because the puppy's tail stopped first. Mica stood with his front legs spread slightly apart. His head tilted to one side. One hind leg began to tremble. "Mica?" The puppy tried to move. His body disagreed. He staggered sideways and sat down hard. Then, for several seconds, his legs shook beneath him. Hollis was already moving. He did not rush loudly. Panic had never improved anything he had needed to keep alive. He knelt, steadied Mica with both hands, and watched the puppy's eyes. Responsive, breathing, no obvious distress. But something was wrong. Kestrel was beside him now, not frantic, close. Hollis reached for the phone. Lenora answered almost immediately. "Bring him in." No jokes. That worried him more than one would have. The veterinary clinic smelled of disinfectant, wet coats, and old radiators. Mica protested when Lenora examined him, which Hollis considered encouraging. Lenora did not. "Complaining means he has energy," she said, listening to his chest. "It does not mean I know why he lost his balance." Mica attempted to chew the cuff of her slate blue scrub sleeve. She moved it away. "He also has opinions." Those returned early. Lenora took blood, checked glucose, electrolytes, temperature, neurologic responses. She made him walk across a rubber mat several times while Hollis stood at one end. Mica veered once, corrected, then reached Hollis and immediately sat on his boot as though the entire examination had been designed to deliver him there. Lenora frowned at the chart. "What? Nothing useful yet. That doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like anything, which is different." Hollis waited. Lenora removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose, then put them back on. "After what he went through, there are several possibilities. Low blood sugar, electrolyte disturbances, recovery from prolonged malnutrition, metabolic stress, something congenital. Something neurological? Possibly. And something else?" She looked at him. "You're trying to hear the answer you're afraid of." "I'm trying to hear all of them." "Then let me finish finding them." Hollis leaned back against the counter. That was why he trusted Lenora. She treated uncertainty as something to be respected, not defeated by confidence. The preliminary results arrived later that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, nothing that explained everything. A few values were outside the range Lenora expected, not enough to point cleanly in one direction. She asked to see Kestrel. The mother dog had shown no tremors, no balance problems, no visible neurologic signs. But Lenora wanted comparative blood work because mother and pup had shared the same environment and, until recently, the same food and water source. Kestrel tolerated the examination with deep suspicion. When the needle appeared, she looked directly at Hollis. He stood beside her but did not restrain her head. "You can blame me later." Kestrel's eyes remained on him until Lenora finished. The results were not identical to Mica's. They were not supposed to be. But there were enough mild irregularities to make Lenora sit down before speaking. "I don't know if these are connected." Hollis folded his arms. "But?" "No but. There's always a but." "Not today." Lenora turned the chart toward herself. "Mica has been recovering from severe hypothermia and undernutrition. Kestrel has been through pregnancy, nursing, stress, and inconsistent feeding. Those things alone can affect blood work. So we wait. We keep testing carefully." She looked toward Kestrel. "And we do not turn coincidence into evidence just because it gives us a story that feels satisfying." Hollis nodded. He disliked the word coincidence almost as much as he disliked wait, but both had earned their place. 2 days later, Hollis resumed work. Not a full route. One pickup. An elderly couple outside Bari had finally decided to sell a cedar blanket chest they had been discussing with him since autumn. Hollis had postponed twice because of the dogs. Now Mica was stable enough to spend several hours under Lenora's observation. The problem was Kestrel. When Hollis placed Mica's carrier in Lenora's treatment room, Kestrel followed. When he stepped toward the door, she followed again. "No," Hollis said softly. Kestrel stopped. Her eyes went immediately to Mica, then back to Hollis. He tried the door. Kestrel moved between him and it, not aggressively, desperately. Hollis understood. For weeks she had not let the puppy leave her sight unless he was in Hollis's arms. Now he was asking her to walk away entirely. Lenora stood down the hallway. "She can stay here too." Hollis looked at Kestrel. That would be easier, which was exactly why he hesitated. Every safe moment Kestrel had experienced so far depended on Mica being visible. At some point, safety had to become larger than sight. Hollis sat down on the floor. He did not call Kestrel, did not tug the leash. He simply waited beside her. Mica shifted in the carrier. Kestrel nosed the door once. Hollis rested his forearms on his knees. "He comes back." Kestrel looked at him. It was a ridiculous sentence if understood as language, but tone had always mattered more. After almost a minute, Kestrel stepped away from the carrier, one pace, then another. She stopped beside Hollis. He stood. This time, when he walked toward the exit, she followed. Lenora said nothing. Hollis appreciated that too. The trip was uneventful. The cedar chest was good work, late 19th century, hand-cut dovetails, badly refinished in the 70s but salvageable. Hollis talked with the owners, loaded it carefully, and for the first time in weeks found himself thinking about wood grain instead of blood tests. Kestrel waited in the Ford, not relaxed, but functioning. Every time Hollis returned to the truck, she looked behind him as though checking whether Mica had somehow appeared. "He's not hiding in the barn," Hollis told her. Kestrel stared. Reasonable theory, though. On the way back to Hearthwick, sunlight struck the snow so brightly the whole valley seemed sharpened. Hollis pulled into a public roadside turnout to check a trailer strap. Kestrel hopped down on leash. She stretched, sniffed the tire, then froze. Her nose lifted. Not fear, recognition. She turned toward the downhill side of the turnout. Kestrel. She moved again, not pulling hard, but with concentration. Hollis followed. A low slope descended through brush toward a drainage ditch. Above it, beyond a line of trees, lay part of the North Glass property. Hollis knew roughly where they were. He had driven the road for years without thinking about the ditch at all. Kestrel stopped near the bottom. The snow around a concrete culvert had melted into an irregular crescent. That alone meant little. Drainage water could run warmer than frozen ground. Then Hollis saw the vegetation. A strip of dead brown stems followed the narrow flow downhill. Not winter dead, different. Plants just several feet away still stood dry but intact beneath the snow. The water itself carried a cloudy yellow-gray cast. Kestrel lowered her muzzle. Hollis shortened the leash immediately. "No," she tried again. He moved her back uphill. Only then did he take out his phone. Photograph of the culvert, photograph downstream, the road marker, the turnout. He checked his location and wrote it down. He did not step across the ditch, did not collect water in a bottle, did not touch the residue along the edge. 30 years earlier, he might have wanted an answer immediately. Age had taught him the difference between noticing something and owning the right to interpret it. He called Lenora. She listened. "Do you think it means something?" he asked. "I think it means you saw discolored drainage." "That's it?" "That's exactly it." He almost smiled. "What do I do?" "Send me the photos." He did. An hour later, Lenora called back. "I forwarded them to someone." "Who?" "Dr. Laurel Henshaw, County Environmental Health." "Should I know her?" "No, that's usually a good thing." Laurel called him later that evening. Her voice was low and practical. She asked where he had stood, whether he had crossed onto North Glass property, whether Kestrel had contacted the water, whether Hollis had touched anything. "No to all three." "Good. What do the pictures tell you?" "That there's drainage." He laughed once. "You and Lenora rehearse these answers?" "We attend the same secret meeting for people who refuse to speculate." Laurel explained that unusual winter runoff could have many causes: fertilizer concentration, sediment, organic waste, equipment wash, road treatments, even harmless mineral discoloration. She would check the site history. Nothing more. No promises. That night, Hollis picked Mica up from Lenora's clinic. The reunion was almost embarrassing. Kestrel reached the treatment room door and stopped. Mica saw her. His entire body seemed to wag before his tail remembered it had the job. Kestrel crossed the room quickly, smelled him from nose to tail, then stood over him for several seconds. Mica immediately tried to bite her ear. Kestrel closed her eyes. Hollis recognized the expression. Motherhood, apparently, transcended species. On the drive home, Mica slept inside the carrier. Kestrel lay beside it, not touching, not checking every breath, just near. Hollis noticed. He said nothing. The following afternoon, Laurel called again. "I checked North Glass." Hollis stopped sanding the edge of the cedar chest. "And?" 2 years ago, they received written compliance guidance involving storage and handling practices for several agricultural treatment products. "A violation?" "Not a major one. No enforcement case." "So nothing." "I didn't say nothing." Hollis waited. "There was enough concern to document corrective guidance. That's all I know right now." He looked through the workshop window. Kestrel was outside in the snow with Mica. The puppy had discovered that snow collapsed when attacked and was conducting repeated experiments. Kestrel stood nearby, watching with the patient resignation of a creature certain evolution had made a mistake. "What happens next?" Hollis asked. "I review what exists. If there is a reason to inspect anything further, the county handles it." "And me?" "You go back to repairing whatever you were repairing." Hollis looked at the cedar chest. "I can do that." After the call, he returned to sanding. For several minutes, nothing in the workshop moved except his hands. Across town, at North Glass Farm, Blaine Huxley stood at the end of a long greenhouse corridor listening to a manager summarize routine matters: heating, inventory, transport. Then the manager mentioned that Lenora Quaid had requested additional testing related to Kestrel and the puppy. Blaine stopped turning the signet ring on his finger. "What kind of testing?" "I don't know." Blaine looked through the glass toward the snow-covered service yards beyond. Until then, his concern had been ownership, reputation, a retired man refusing to return farm property. Those were manageable problems. Medical records were different. Records created questions. Questions traveled. And for the first time since Kestrel disappeared, Blaine was no longer thinking about how to get the dog back. He was thinking about what might follow her home. Nothing happened quickly after Laurel Henshaw opened a file on North Glass Farm. That, Hollis discovered, was what real scrutiny looked like. No convoy appeared at the gates. No one kicked open a warehouse door. No guilty man was dragged into daylight before breakfast. Instead, Laurel requested records, drainage plans, storage declarations, treatment logs, purchase histories, maintenance reports. The process seemed almost aggressively ordinary. Hollis liked that. Ordinary things were harder to dismiss as theater. He had sent Laurel his photographs and answered every question she asked. After that, she told him plainly that his role was finished unless someone contacted him again. Good, Hollis had said, and meant it, mostly. The trouble with stepping away from a problem was that the problem did not always step away from you. 3 days later, another letter arrived from the attorney representing North Glass. This one was different. Hollis read it standing at his kitchen counter while Mica attempted to drag a dish towel twice his own size beneath the table. North Glass would cover all veterinary expenses related to the puppy. It would reimburse food and care for Kestrel. It would waive any claim concerning Mica. Hollis stopped reading. He went back to the beginning of the paragraph. North Glass was willing to let him keep the puppy. In exchange, Kestrel was to be returned. He read the sentence a third time. Kestrel lay near the window, watching Mica lose his argument with the towel. Hollis looked at her. 6 years at North Glass, 6 winters, 6 growing seasons. Water, food, soil, air. Whatever Mica had been exposed to for weeks, Kestrel's body might have carried a much longer history. Hollis did not know whether that mattered medically. He did know the offer bothered him. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. Mica finally freed the towel, stumbled backward, and sat on it with the expression of someone surprised by his own victory. Hollis did not smile. The offer had clarified something Blaine had been careful not to say. The puppy was negotiable. The mother was not. Across town, Silas Broom had stopped sleeping well. Guilt rarely announced itself as guilt at first. It arrived as smaller inconveniences. Waking at 2:17, remembering the same sentence, opening the refrigerator and forgetting why, finding reasons to avoid the road leading toward North Glass. Silas had worked there almost 18 years, long enough to remember when Blaine still repaired irrigation valves himself, long enough to remember employee barbecues in July when North Glass had been 3 greenhouse bays and a borrowed tractor instead of a regional supplier with contracts, lawyers, and expansion loans. That history made things harder. Blaine had not always been the man Silas now feared disappointing, and Silas had not always been the man who checked a box he knew was false. He sat one morning in the cab of his truck outside the county offices, his keys still in the ignition. A large steel carabiner loaded with work keys hung from his belt. Usually the keys made him feel useful. That morning they felt like evidence of all the doors he had been allowed to open without ever asking what happened behind some of them. Silas nearly drove away. Then he remembered Kestrel pushing through broken wire with a freezing puppy in her mouth. He had never seen it. That was the problem. He had managed not to see a great many things. Silas shut off the engine. Deputy Coralie Venn met him in a small interview room 20 minutes later. She did not offer absolution. Silas was grateful for that. "I falsified the kennel check." Coralie's pencil stopped. "Say that again." Silas did. He explained the ice, the truck, the unanswered call, the inspection form, the lie. Coralie listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked, "Why now?" Silas stared at his hands. "Because every day I waited made the first lie easier to live with." "That isn't an answer." He swallowed. "Because the dog almost lost her pup, because I wanted to avoid one bad conversation with my boss." Coralie wrote something down. Silas continued before courage could cool. There had been other things. Nothing he could prove illegal. Early morning deliveries. Sections of greenhouse occasionally closed to ordinary staff. Instructions from Blaine to alter treatment schedules without explaining why. Unmarked drums moved from one storage shed to another. Did you know what was in them? No. Did you ever handle them? Some. Read the labels? Sometimes the labels were turned toward the wall. Coralie looked up. Silas's face tightened. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like something I'll write exactly the way you said it." Silas nodded. That was what he had come for. Not forgiveness, accuracy. He gave her operating schedules and identified which greenhouse sections had repeatedly been restricted. Then he went home and waited for whatever his honesty would cost. The next person did not arrive because guilt drove her there. Maren Duval came because Laurel asked for purchase records. Maren was 66 and had kept part-time accounts for North Glass for 11 years. She was small, composed, and carried herself with the tidy precision of a person who believed every paper belonged somewhere specific. Her silver blonde hair fell to her shoulders and was clipped neatly away from one side of her face. Round, brown-framed glasses rested low on her nose when she read. She knew numbers, not chemicals. That distinction mattered to her. Laurel sat across from her in a county office with several years of vendor records spread between them. "I'm not asking you to identify any product," Laurel said. "Good, because I can't. I'm asking whether the accounting descriptions changed." Maren looked again. She had seen the entries hundreds of times. That was almost the problem. Soil conditioning supplies, equipment sanitation, winter treatment. Nothing inherently suspicious in any of them. North Glass bought enormous quantities of ordinary agricultural material. But when Laurel placed the invoices chronologically, the pattern became harder to overlook. The amounts increased, then increased again. Some vendors changed. A few purchases were divided into smaller invoices. Maren's fingers stopped halfway down one page. "I remember this." "What?" "Blaine asked me to move it." "Move what?" "The expense category. It had originally come through under crop treatment." "Why did he want it changed?" "He said accounting had coded it wrong, that it was part of sanitation." "Did you believe him?" Maren looked through the lenses at Laurel. "At the time?" "Yes. I decided it wasn't my job to know." The sentence remained between them. Maren took off her glasses and cleaned them, although they were not dirty. For years, she had believed precision made her neutral. If an invoice totaled correctly, she entered it. If a manager approved the classification, she recorded it. She had never signed a chemical permit, never poured anything into soil, never opened a drain. And yet here she was, staring at numbers that had been passing through her hands while becoming steadily stranger. Laurel did not accuse her. That was somehow worse. "What do you need from me?" Maren asked. "The originals, including anything that was later recoded." Maren nodded slowly. "I kept them." Laurel looked up. "All of them?" "I don't trust digital filing." For the first time that afternoon, Laurel almost smiled. Maren returned the next morning with 3 storage boxes. The paper did not reveal a crime by itself. It revealed a direction. North Glass had suffered repeated crop root problems over several seasons. Yields fell. Treatment costs rose. Debt payments tightened. A major distribution contract came under review. Blaine responded the way frightened businessmen often did, first with ordinary measures, then expensive ones, then measures that required explanations. Eventually, some of those explanations became easier to avoid than provide. Laurel began comparing the records against product use restrictions, declared storage practices, and the drainage system serving the greenhouse blocks. Nothing yet amounted to the whole truth, but the pieces no longer looked unrelated. When Hollis heard some of this from Coralie, only what she was permitted to tell him, he felt no triumph. That surprised him. He had expected anger to feel cleaner once it had a shape. Instead, the story sounded tired. A farm began losing crops. A man feared losing a business. He took one shortcut, then another. People around him noticed fragments. One worker assumed management knew better. One accountant decided classification was not her responsibility. One foreman avoided an argument during a storm. None of them had chosen the final outcome. They had chosen smaller things. Hollis understood smaller things. That evening, he went into the back room of his workshop looking for a hinge. He found a wooden sign instead. It had been leaning behind 2 cabinet doors for 6 years. The lettering was unfinished. Merrick Old Things. Adeline had penciled a line beneath it in her handwriting. A shop should be a place people stay a while. Hollis sat on a work stool. He could hear Mica somewhere in the house attempting to murder an empty cardboard tube. Kestrel's nails crossed the floor once, then stopped. Hollis ran his thumb over Adeline's pencil marks. He had never made a decision to abandon the store they had planned. That was the uncomfortable part. After she died, Wesley invited him to dinner. Hollis declined. Someone asked him to join a veterans' breakfast. He said maybe next month. A woman with a vacant storefront called to ask whether he still wanted the lease. He said not yet. He stopped returning certain calls because every conversation required explaining how he was doing. Eventually, people asked less often. Then, not at all. There had been no single day when Hollis chose loneliness. He had simply selected it in installments. The comparison with Blaine disturbed him, not because the consequences were equal, they were not, but because the mechanism was familiar. A person could travel a great distance by repeatedly insisting each individual step did not matter very much. Hollis turned the unfinished sign over. Behind him, Kestrel entered the workshop. Mica followed, carrying the cardboard tube sideways and striking it against both sides of the doorway. Hollis watched him struggle through. "You could turn it," he said. Mica pushed harder. Kestrel sat. Hollis looked at her. "You raised him." Kestrel yawned. He took that as refusal of liability. A phone rang in the house. It was Coralie. "I can't discuss details," she said, "but the county has enough information to continue reviewing North Glass." "Because of the ditch?" "Because of several things." "Silas?" A pause. "I'm not discussing witnesses." "That means yes." "That means I'm reconsidering why I call you." Hollis smiled faintly. Then Coralie's voice hardened. "Do not go to North Glass." "I wasn't planning to." "Do not talk to employees." "I haven't." "Do not decide you've solved anything." Hollis looked at Adeline's unfinished sign. "I haven't." That answer was easier to give than it would have been 30 years earlier. After the call, he returned the sign to the bench instead of hiding it behind the doors. Not hanging it, not yet, just leaving it where he could see it. At North Glass, Blaine stood alone in his office after dark. Outside the glass wall, greenhouse lights stretched away in ordered rows. Once the sight had made him proud. Now every glowing bay seemed to represent another expense, another loan payment, another person expecting him to keep the operation alive. On his desk sat a request for additional records. He read it slowly. His thumb turned the silver signet ring on his right hand. Blaine had told himself the same thing for years. Get through this season. Protect the contract. Fix the problem later. Later had always seemed like a place with more money, more time, fewer consequences. Instead, later had arrived carrying forms. He looked out across North Glass. For the first time, the farm did not look like proof of everything he had built. It looked like a record of everything he had postponed answering for. And somewhere beyond those glass walls, the people who had spent years telling themselves they did not know enough were beginning, one by one, to say what they did know. The call came just after 7 in the morning. Hollis was in the workshop fitting a replacement hinge to the cedar chest when Coralie Venn's name appeared on his phone. He wiped sawdust from his hand before answering. "Merrick." "You always answer your own phone like someone else might pick it up?" "Old habit." Coralie did not laugh. That told him enough. "We have authorization to expand the inspection at North Glass." Hollis set the screwdriver down. "When?" "Today." His eyes went automatically toward the wall map hanging above the workbench. It was an old county road map, creased white along the folds and marked with pencil notes from years of estate pickups. North Glass sat north of town. He knew the service roads. He knew the public access points. He knew where the drainage line crossed beneath the county road. His mind began arranging the property before Coralie finished speaking. "How many people?" "That is not information you need." "Which sections are you entering?" "Also not information you need." Hollis leaned one hand against the bench. The answer irritated him, not because Coralie was wrong, because she was right. 35 years earlier, being told a dangerous operation was underway would have meant preparation. Map, route, contingencies. Who was inside, who was outside, where he fit. Even after retirement, some part of his mind still believed usefulness meant proximity to the problem. "I can identify the western service lane," he said. "We have Silas. The old drainage runs behind Greenhouse 4. We have plans. There's a maintenance gate off Hollis." He stopped. Coralie's voice softened. "Stay home." The words landed harder than they should have. He looked toward the open workshop door. Kestrel was lying just beyond it, watching Mica attempt to climb into an empty basket that had already defeated him twice. Hollis touched the scratched face of his old Hamilton watch. "What if something changes? I call you. What if you need, we call you?" He knew that tone. It was not dismissal. It was a boundary. "All right." Coralie paused. "You mean that?" "No." "Good enough." The line went dead. Hollis stood in the workshop for nearly a minute. The map remained on the wall. He could drive to the county road without entering North Glass property. He could park at the public turnout. He could tell himself he was only watching. That was exactly why he did not. He returned to the cedar chest. The hinge needed 2 screws. He installed them slowly. At North Glass, official vehicles entered through the main gate just after 8. Laurel Henshaw arrived with a county environmental team in 2 trucks carrying sampling kits, sealed containers, protective equipment, and enough paperwork to discourage anyone who imagined investigations happened quickly. Coralie came separately. Silas Broom waited near the maintenance building. He looked older than he had a week earlier. The large ring of keys at his belt seemed almost absurd now. For years, those keys had meant that Silas knew the farm. That morning, they only meant he knew where the doors were. Laurel met him beside a utility shed. "Show us the drainage controls first." Silas nodded. He did not ask what they expected to find. That mattered. Marin Duval had already delivered the original invoices and recoded purchase records. She was not needed on site, but her boxes sat in a county office where numbers were being compared against storage declarations and product use logs. At North Glass, the work was physical. Valve locations, storage rooms, wash stations, waste lines, greenhouse treatment records. Laurel's team took samples only where procedure allowed. Each container was labeled, timed, logged, sealed, photographed. Silas answered questions. Sometimes he knew, sometimes he said he did not. No one rewarded him for either answer. By noon, several discrepancies had become difficult to explain as clerical error. Declared storage did not match what remained on site. Treatment records did not fully align with purchase quantities. One wash-water route connected to a drainage path that had been represented differently in older paperwork. None of those facts alone told the whole story. Together, they justified more questions. By early afternoon, county officials ordered part of North Glass's operation suspended while environmental evaluation continued. The greenhouses did not go dark all at once. That would have looked dramatic. Instead, activity narrowed. Certain bays were closed. Equipment stopped moving through selected areas. Employees were told to remain clear of restricted sections. The farm continued breathing, but unevenly, like something discovering that not every part of itself still belonged to it. Hollis learned about the partial suspension from Coralie at 2:15. He had spent the morning doing deliberately ordinary things. He changed Mica's water, repaired the cedar chest, cleared snow from the back steps, made lunch and forgot to eat half of it. Every 40 minutes, he found himself looking at the phone. Kestrel noticed. She had learned many of his habits by then. She knew the sound of the coffee tin, the difference between his work boots and house shoes, the metallic click of the workshop door. Now she seemed to learn waiting. Whenever Hollis stopped moving, she looked at him as if checking whether he required action. He did not. That was the strange part. When Coralie finally called, she gave him very little. Partial suspension. Anything dangerous? Nothing I'm discussing by phone. Anyone hurt? No. Hollis exhaled. He had not realized that was the question he cared about most. Coralie continued. The review goes on. Stay out of it. I'm sanding furniture. Good. She's antique furniture. The furniture doesn't care what I call it. Coralie ended the call. Hollis stood at the kitchen counter afterward and looked out over the snow. He expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt something more complicated. North Glass employed people who had done nothing wrong. Truck drivers, packers, maintenance workers, people who had mortgages and medication bills and aging parents. Consequences rarely landed only on the person who caused them. That did not mean consequences should be avoided. It meant they should never be celebrated carelessly. By 4, the light had begun to turn blue over Hearthwick. A vehicle came up the hill. Hollis recognized it before it reached the drive. Blaine Huxley's SUV. This time the vehicle stopped farther from the house. Blaine got out alone. No lawyer, no envelope, No careful public smile. Hollis watched through the window. Kestrel was near the stove. Mica was asleep inside a shallow wooden box Hollis had converted into a temporary bed. Hollis pulled on his old olive field jacket and stepped outside. The air had that dry, metallic cold that made every breath visible. Blaine stood near the edge of the drive. His chestnut coat was buttoned wrong by one button. Hollis noticed because Blaine was usually too controlled for details like that. "You heard," Blaine said. "Yes." "They shut down 3 sections." Hollis said nothing. "Do you know what that costs?" "No." "Of course you don't." There was no insult in the words, only exhaustion. Blaine looked past him toward the house. 30 years. Hollis waited. "I built North Glass for 30 years. His voice was lower now. "No inheritance. No old family money. I borrowed against everything I had. First greenhouse leaked every spring. We packed lettuce by hand because I couldn't afford the line." Hollis studied him. For once, Blaine was not performing respectability. He looked tired enough to be honest by accident. "Then root disease hit us," Blaine continued. 2 seasons. Yields dropped. Contract review came early. Bank wanted numbers I couldn't give them. And I kept it alive." "North Glass?" "Yes." Blaine stepped closer. "People work there, Hollis. Good people. You think I was protecting a logo?" "No." Blaine stopped. The answer visibly unsettled him. "You don't?" "No." "Then what exactly do you think?" Hollis looked down the hill where snow lay clean along the road. "I think you probably started with a reason." Blaine's jaw tightened. "I had more than a reason." "I believe you." "Then why are we here?" Hollis met his eyes. "Because not wanting the consequence doesn't mean you didn't choose the cause." Blaine looked away. For several seconds there was only wind moving powder across the driveway. "You make it sound simple." "It probably wasn't." "That's easy for you to say." "No." That word came quieter. Blaine looked back. Hollis touched the edge of his jacket pocket. "My wife wanted me to open a store with her." Blaine frowned, clearly unsure why they had changed subjects. "I kept saying later," Hollis continued. "1 year, then another. There was always work first, money first. Some reason why later made more sense." His gaze moved towards the workshop. "She died before later." Blaine said nothing. "I didn't decide to waste that time," Hollis said. "I just kept choosing the thing that wasted it." Something in Blaine's face changed. Not repentance, recognition perhaps, or anger at recognizing anything in the man he had decided was his enemy. Then Blaine looked through the front window. Kestrel had risen. She stood behind the glass. He stared at her. The first time he had come to the house, Kestrel had dropped low around Mica. Now she simply stood, alert, still, watching. "She never acted like that at North Glass," Blaine said. Hollis turned slightly. "Like what?" Blaine did not answer immediately. "Like I'm a stranger." Hollis opened the front door. He did not call Kestrel. For a moment she stayed inside. Then she stepped onto the porch. Her paws touched the snow. Blaine went still. Kestrel looked at him. She did not retreat. She did not bark. She did not place herself between Hollis and Blaine. Instead, she walked to Hollis's side, stopped. Her shoulder rested near his leg, not behind him, not in front, beside. Blaine's eyes remained on her. "Nobody beat that dog," he said. Hollis did not respond. "She had food." Still nothing. "Shelter." Hollis looked down at Kestrel. She was watching Blaine without trembling. Blaine's voice changed, quieter. "Is she really that afraid of me?" Hollis could have answered. He could have listed the reactions, the lowered body, the guarded puppy, the way Kestrel had responded to Blaine's voice. But those were observations, not testimony, and Kestrel did not need him to turn her into an argument. "You lived beside her 6 years, Hollis said. He looked at Blaine. "You should know." Blaine's mouth opened slightly, then closed. There was nothing Hollis could say that would make the moment cleaner. Blaine looked at Kestrel one last time, turned, walked back to the SUV. No threat, no promise to return, no final insult. He got in and drove away. Kestrel watched the vehicle descend the hill. The first time Blaine had left this property, she had stayed fixed on the road long after he disappeared. Now she watched until the SUV passed behind the trees. Then she turned away. That was all. She went back inside. Hollis followed. Mica had awakened. The puppy stood beside the cedar chest Hollis had spent 3 days restoring. He placed both front paws against it and tried to climb. Failed. Tried again. Failed harder. On the third attempt he slid backward and landed on his rump. Hollis folded his arms. Strategic adjustment? Mica stared at the chest, then tried a fourth time. Hollis sighed. He lifted the puppy onto the smooth wooden top. Mica walked one small circle, collapsed, and went to sleep. Hollis stared at him. 3 days of polishing. Kestrel came over and lay beside Hollis's boots. Outside, North Glass remained under inspection. Phones were ringing, reports were being written, samples were being logged. Men and women were deciding what could remain open and what could not. Hollis did not know how the case would end. He did not know what would happen to Blaine. He did not know whether North Glass would survive. For once, he did not need to know. He reached down and rested his hand against Kestrel's shoulder. She leaned into him. Mica slept on the cedar chest as if furniture ownership had already been settled in his favor. Hollis looked around the room. Months earlier, the house had required no one. Now water bowls needed filling. Blankets needed washing. A puppy needed lifting onto furniture he had no business occupying. A mother dog no longer believed every danger belonged to her alone. And an old soldier had finally discovered that staying home could sometimes require more discipline than going to war. By the end of March, winter had begun to loosen its grip on Hearthwick. Not surrender. Not yet. Snow still covered the northern slopes, and the woods remained white where sunlight could not reach between the pines. But afternoons lasted longer. Water tapped steadily from gutters. Dark seams appeared along the edges of frozen streams, and the roads began showing themselves again beneath salt, sand, and months of packed ice. The town changed with the light. People stood outside longer after collecting their mail. Shop doors remained open for a few minutes at midday. Someone placed 2 metal chairs on the sidewalk outside the bakery, despite the fact that nobody sensible would sit in them for another month. North Glass Farm did not disappear. Real consequences rarely arrived as cleanly as stories wanted them to. Several greenhouse sections remained suspended while environmental review continued. Soil and drainage remediation plans were being developed. Records moved between attorneys, county offices, insurers, and regulators. Some equipment was sold. Other assets were listed. Blaine Huxley faced financial, regulatory, and civil consequences that had not yet finished taking shape. Hollis did not follow every development. He had stopped needing to. Silas Broom lost his job when North Glass reduced operations. He came into town once and saw Hollis outside Wesley Finch's shop. For a moment, both men seemed unsure whether conversation was required. Silas solved it. "I should have told the truth that night." Hollis looked at him. "Yes." Silas nodded. There was relief in not being rescued from the sentence. "I'm looking for work." "You'll find some." "Maybe." Hollis offered his hand. Silas stared at it briefly before taking it. Nothing was forgiven ceremonially. Nothing needed to be. Sometimes accountability was simply being allowed to continue after admitting where you had failed. Marin Duval found bookkeeping work with a small heating company outside town. Wesley reported this as if he personally had negotiated the appointment, despite having done nothing beyond recommending a diner where Marin could celebrate with pie. The investigation had changed people, but not evenly. That seemed honest to Hollis. Some became braver, some became quieter. Some merely learned that claiming not to know something did not erase the moment when they had chosen not to ask. Meanwhile, the question of Kestrel and Mica finally became ordinary enough to fit on a stack of forms. That was how Hollis preferred it. Lenora called him to the clinic on a bright Tuesday morning. Mica was now larger, stronger, and increasingly convinced that furniture had been invented for climbing. His coat had begun losing some of its puppy softness, though the cream-colored drop on his chest remained. His left ear had risen first. The right still leaned slightly outward, giving him the expression of someone permanently listening to 2 different conversations. Kestrel had gained weight. Her dark coat had recovered its deep charcoal shine, and the copper coloring along her legs looked richer against the fading snow. Lenora pushed a folder across the desk. The temporary placement can become permanent. Hollis looked at the papers, then did nothing. Lenora waited. She was good at that. Finally she said, "You changed your mind?" "No." "You're making a convincing imitation of someone who did." Hollis looked through the open doorway. Mica had seized Wesley's bootlace and was backing away with all the concentration of a dock worker hauling rope. Wesley, who had come because he claimed Hollis should not be allowed to sign important documents without adult supervision, stared down at him. "Release private property." Mica pulled harder. Hollis looked back at Lenora. "I'm 74. Her expression changed. Not pity, understanding. "Yes." "He could live 12 years, maybe more." "Yes." "Kestrel could outlive me too." Lenora folded her hands. "That's possible." Hollis looked again at the paperwork. Until that moment, adoption had sounded like a promise about what he wanted. Now it sounded like a promise about what would happen when wanting was no longer enough. He closed the folder. "I need a week." Wesley looked over. "A week?" Hollis ignored him. Lenora nodded. "Take it." That became the hardest decision Hollis made all winter. Not whether he loved them. That part had become embarrassingly obvious. The harder question was whether he could love them without pretending he would always be available to protect them. He called Wesley first. "If something happens to me, Kestrel needs somewhere permanent." There was a pause. Then Wesley said, "You're asking me?" "I am." "You know I own clocks because they don't shed." "Think about it." "I already did." Hollis frowned. "That was fast." "I've known you 40 years. I've had plenty of time to prepare for the possibility you'd eventually make my life inconvenient." Wesley agreed to take Kestrel if Hollis became unable to care for her. For Mica, Hollis arranged a second home with Eleanor Pike, 62, a longtime customer and retired postal worker who lived on a small fenced property outside town and had kept shepherds most of her adult life. She had met Mica twice during Hollis's pickups and had made the tactical error of telling him he was handsome. Mica had remembered her forever. Lenora retained complete medical records and agreed to serve as the first veterinary contact. Hollis placed money into a dedicated account for future care. He wrote instructions, feeding, medications, veterinary contacts, preferred routines, where Kestrel liked to sleep, the fact that Mica would eat anything that remained unattended below waist height and should therefore never be trusted around sandwiches. Then Hollis placed all of it in the small fireproof box beneath his desk. The following morning, he signed the adoption papers. There was no photograph, no applause, no one posted anything. Lenora signed where required. Hollis signed beneath her. Mica tried to eat the corner of the folder. Wesley rescued it. "Family tradition?" he asked. "Poor judgment," Hollis said. He looked down at Kestrel. She was asleep. That detail mattered more than the signature. Weeks earlier, she would not have slept while Mica wandered into another room. Now Mica disappeared behind Lenora's reception desk in pursuit of a dropped pen. Kestrel lifted her head, listened, then put it back down. Safety had become something larger than eyesight. Spring entered Hollis's life in other ways. One morning he drove into Harthwick carrying the old unfinished sign from his workshop. Wesley was already waiting across Main Street. "You're late." "I didn't tell you a time." "You were still late." The storefront had stood empty since autumn. One large front window, old maple floors, a narrow workshop room in the back. Adeline had once stood outside that exact building years earlier and said, "This would do." Hollis had answered what he always answered. Someday. Someday had become one of those words people used when they wanted to postpone something without admitting they were afraid of it. Now Hollis climbed a ladder. Wesley held the bottom badly while offering unnecessary engineering advice. Together they mounted the restored sign. "Merrick Old Things." Hollis had painted a new line beneath Adeline's old lettering. "Everything has a story." When he climbed down, Wesley stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked up. "Adeline would say you took long enough." Hollis looked at the sign. "Yeah." There was nothing else required. The shop opened without ceremony. At first people came because they were curious. Then because Hollis could fix things. Then because the place became somewhere people stayed. A widow brought in a tabletop radio that had belonged to her husband. "It doesn't work." Hollis turned it over. "Probably can. I'm not sure I want it to." He looked up. She explained that her husband used to leave baseball games playing too loudly in the kitchen. Hollis listened. Months earlier, he might have asked what she wanted for the radio. Instead, he asked, what was his name? That became part of the work. A retired mechanic brought his father's toolbox. A woman brought a clock that had not run since 2004. A farmer sold Hollis a scarred oak table and spent 40 minutes explaining every family meal it had survived. Some objects left the store. Some returned home repaired. Some never belonged to Hollis at all. Kestrel usually lay near the door. Mica became an employee in the loosest possible legal sense. He greeted every customer, inspected every bag, attempted to assist with packing materials. Hollis referred to him as a four-legged security breach. One afternoon, an unfamiliar man entered carrying an old camera. The bell above the door rang. Kestrel's head rose. Hollis saw it from behind the counter. Months earlier, she would have stood, positioned herself, checked where Mica was. The stranger took 3 steps into the shop. Kestrel looked at him, then at Hollis. Hollis remained relaxed. Kestrel lowered her chin between her paws. Her eyes closed. Hollis stopped polishing the brass hinge in his hand. The man with the camera never noticed. He could not know that a dog falling asleep was sometimes more remarkable than a dog standing guard. Hollis did. By early April, Harthwick still had snow in the shadows. One bright morning, Hollis loaded 2 blankets and a tool case into the Ford. A farmer across the valley had an old phonograph he wanted evaluated. Kestrel climbed into the passenger side without hesitation. Mica came running from the shop. He tried to jump into the cab, failed, backed up, tried again, failed with greater commitment. Hollis looked down at him. No. Mica sat, his uneven ears tilted forward. No. Mica continued staring. You cannot negotiate every issue with your face. Wesley appeared in the shop doorway. Mica stared harder. Hollis sighed and lifted him into the truck. Wesley shook his head. SEAL teams teach negotiations like that? Hollis shut the door. No. This opponent has unfair leverage. Wesley laughed. The Ford rolled away from Main Street with the old trailer behind it. Sunlight lay across the remaining snow in broad gold bands. For years, Hollis had driven those roads looking for things other people no longer wanted. Broken chairs, silent clocks, cracked cabinets, boxes forgotten in attics. He had believed his work was deciding what might still have value. He understood it differently now. Not everything abandoned needed saving. Not everything broken could be restored. Love did not guarantee repair. Kindness did not erase consequence. The winter had taught him something less grand and more difficult. Sometimes life placed something vulnerable in your path and gave you no certainty at all. Only the knowledge that you had seen it. The question was what you did after that. Many people had seen Kestrel that winter. Hollis had simply stopped the truck, but he was no longer foolish enough to believe that made him the only rescuer. Kestrel had carried Mica out of the cold. Lenora had kept uncertainty honest. Silas had eventually told the truth. Marin had finally asked what the numbers meant. Wesley had kept showing up without requiring gratitude. Mica had brought laughter into rooms that had forgotten the sound. And Hollis had finally opened a door Adeline had waited years for him to open. Not because grief had ended. It had not. Adeline remained absent. That truth had not softened. What had changed was Hollis's belief that loving what was gone required him to remain where it had left him. Kestrel rested her head against his thigh. Mica had fallen asleep between his old leather gloves. Ahead, snowmelt flashed along the roadside. The hills were still white in places, but dark earth showed through. Hollis kept driving. For once he was not traveling to recover something the world had discarded. He was simply moving forward with what he had chosen to keep. Sometimes the biggest choices in life do not look heroic. They look like stopping the truck, opening the door, telling the truth after staying silent too long, or taking responsibility for something simply because we were the one who noticed. Hollis did not save everyone by himself. Kestrel carried her puppy through the snow. Silas finally admitted his mistake. Marin chose to ask what the numbers meant. And one by one, small, honest decisions began undoing the damage caused by years of easier ones. Maybe that is where grace often meets us, not in perfect people, but in the moment we decide to do the next right thing. If this story stayed with you, share in the comments what choice spoke to you most. And if you enjoy stories about courage, loyalty, and the quiet goodness that can still change a life, subscribe and join us for the next one. May you have the courage to notice, the wisdom to choose well, and peace in whatever road lies ahead.